Welcome to Chapter 10 of the Muscular System. This is part 1 of 3. This is where we're going to start looking at the muscular system, but this is mostly going to be the introduction. Just like there was a shock value when we started doing bones, there should be a little bit of a shock value when we start doing the muscles. So let's jump right on in. So some facts about muscles. Muscles constitute nearly half the body's weight. They occupy a place of central interest in several fields in healthcare and fitness, physical, occupational therapy, athletes, dancers, trainers, acrobats, nurses, and many, many more. The muscular system is closely related to many other systems, and we've already covered most of these things already. Chapters 11 and 12 will then examine the mechanisms of muscle contraction and the cellular and molecular levels. So we do look at neurons and how neurons connect with muscles, but Chapter 12 is actually going to be Test 5. Chapter 11, we're going to look at the contraction. So in this chapter, we're going to look at the structure and function and organization of the muscles. We're going to first look at the muscles of head and neck, muscles of the trunk, of the upper limb and shoulder, and then the lower limb. And that's how we're going to kind of break them down. So with these, we're going to kind of look at the different functions of muscles. But what we need to look at is if you're in the lab, if you're doing this lab online, go to the SLC or the Student Learning Center at the campus closest to you. If you do that, you are more likely to retain some of this information. The more of this information you can retain because you can touch it, you can feel it, you can see it, you can start asking the tutor questions about this stuff. The more likely you are to recover this information or retain this information when you're taking the test. So we're going to the connective tissue components of muscles, relationship to the bundling of the muscle fibers, that's all important, but that's kind of basic. It's easy to see. We're going to describe the various shapes of skeletal muscles and relate to their function, because muscle fibers to this point, until you forget what a muscle is, all it's going to do is shorten. So if the shape is weird and looks different, it's going to affect the way that muscle is going to shorten. We're going to look at the origin, insertion, belly, action, and innervation for a muscle. For the lab class, you probably need to know origin and insertion, action and innervation. Innervation just means what nerve is working on that muscle. We're going to look at the ways the muscle works in the group to aid or oppose or moderate each other's actions. We're then going to describe in general terms the nerve supply to the muscles and where these nerves originate. And that's all going back to the innervation. Let's get started. So there's around 600 human skeletal muscles. Yes, that's just as shocking as 206 bones. Good thing for you, the majority of these are going to be in your face and your hands. And because your face and your hand is very, very small muscles that we cannot ask on tests, and usually writing and vision and all these other things, we will kind of look at them later, but in different areas and in different classes. So if you're doing different types of physical therapy, you might be speech, and those are going to be working on those small muscles for speech. If you do writing or walking or trying to get people to start doing basic movements to help with their lives after a stroke, you're going to be looking at different muscle groups. And you're going to be learning those when you're doing those other programs. So we're not going to look at 600. We're probably going to cover about 50 of them. And those 50, you should know about 40 of them, like deltoid, biceps brachii, so stuff like that. So it's about half our body weight, which we talked about. There's 3 types: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. We kind of went over those when we talked about the histology. They're specialized for one major purpose: converting chemical energy of ATP into the mechanical energy of motion. And myology is the study of the muscular system. So movement. They move from place to place. Movement of body parts, body contents for breathing, circulation, feeding, digestion, defecation, urination, childbirth. Some role in communication with speech, because you have to be able to manipulate your vocal cords for different types of sound in your tongue. Writing in your hand and nonverbal communications of your face. Also for stability, you need to be able to maintain posture. So when you're standing, you need to have balance. When you are sitting in a chair, you need to be able to have posture so you don't fall over and hit your head. Also for control of opening and closing passageways. In AMP2, you're going to talk about a bunch of different types of sphincters. And sphincters are just going to be rings of muscles that open and close from one area to another. Also for heat production. If we start to shiver, we're going to start producing most of our heat. When we start to shiver, because there's blood supply in the muscles, it's going to heat up the blood. So that's why heat production is very important for muscles. And also glycemic control. It's going to regulate a regulation of blood glucose and concentration within its normal range. You might not think about it so much, but because glucose is used for ATP in all of the mitochondria we're going to talk about with muscle fibers, it's going to be able to have a direct control over the control of blood glucose. Endomysium, paramysium, epimysium, fascia. So those four terms. The reason why I didn't stop on any of those slides is because I wanted you to kind of see that was just explaining you bundle up one type of muscle fiber. So endomysium surrounding one muscle fiber. So if you surround one muscle fiber, it's going to have an endomysium. You take a bundle of many muscle fibers, that's going to be surrounded by the paramysium. The paramysium then gets surrounded by the epimysium. You might say, but that's not pointing to the epimysium. The epimysium is right here, which if you see right there, it's just this outer layer. And then eventually the epimysium is going to be covered by the fascia, and then the fascia goes into the tendon. And that's why muscle to bone is connected by a tendon. So instead of spending time with each one, it's pretty much our Goldilocks thing. Smallest, bigger, big, surrounding that, going into a tendon. These are the different shapes. We're not going to spend a lot of time looking at these different shapes, but if you just take, that's one end, that's another end, that belly will just move this part closer to this part. Perfect. This one, because they're parallel, can actually pull all that down to what's going there. This concentrates this whole area into that area. This looks like a leaf, so it's kind of contracting everything down, and this one will cause opening and closing. So we're not going to look at the shapes. What we're going to focus on more is what are the names of these muscles and what do they do? And after a while, you're going to know that the bicularis or oculi is going to blink or close the eye. The deltoid muscle, because it's this multi-pennant muscle, it's going to mean that it can adduct the arm, it can elevate the arm, it can hyperextend, it can do all these different things to the arm because it has all of these different structures and all different types of origins that it comes from. So let's look at the tendon. Muscle to bone. They're going to have collagen fibers of the endo, peri, and epimysium continued into the tendon. That's how they're all getting wrapped up into the bone. You're going to have an aponeuroses of the tendon is a broad flat sheet. You have a palmar aponeuroses, and that palmar aponeuroses is going to be very important when we talk about carpal tunnel. You can also have a reticulum, and a reticulum is a connective tissue band that tendons from separate muscles pass under. So you can have an aponeuroses and a reticulum. The origin is going to be the attachment or the stationary end of the muscle. The belly is going to be the actual contracting part of the muscles, and the insertion is where the muscle is going to go in. If you think about it, the origin usually sits still. The belly brings the insertion closer to the origin. In this system, that's going to be the action. When you move the insertion closer to the origin, it's going to produce or prevent a movement. The prime mover is going to be the main force actor on that particular joint. Prime mover or agonist is the one doing most of the movement. Synergists are going to help out. They're going to aid the prime mover. They stabilize the nearby joint. They modify the direction of the movement to kind of help out. Antagonists are going to oppose, which means they're going to kind of either relax when the prime mover is working, and then you also have a muscle that can fix, that prevents the movement of the bone. If you're looking at this again, you can have the biceps brachii and the brachialis. The brachialis, because it's right there to right there, is going to bring your radius and the ulna up to flex the forearm. The bicep brachii helps out. Rotator cuff is going to make sure that the top of the humerus doesn't move. Antagonist is going to be the triceps, which means that when this is moving the arm up, this is relaxing. And then you're going to have fixators, which is going to help kind of fix and firmly make sure that the humerus doesn't move. And finally, what's an innervation? An innervation of a muscle refers to the identity of a nerve that stimulates it. It enables the diagnosis of nerve, spinal cord, and brainstem injuries from their effective muscles. So if you are in a hospital and you have nerve damage, you can just ask somebody to move their arm. And if they can't move their arm, you know what part of the brain might be damaged. So you can see all these different types of diagnostic benefits by knowing innervations of particular muscles and particular muscle groups. Then if you take it a next step further, the spinal nerves are going to arise from the spinal cord. They're going to go through a plexus. These we're going to talk about with the spinal cord, so we're not going to talk about them now. We'll talk about them later. Just to kind of give you a shock value before we go on to any more parts and muscle groups, these are most of the muscles that we're going to go over. Most of these will kind of make sense by the time we finish these lectures. So please keep on. Please don't get overwhelmed. If you get overwhelmed, please email me. Contact the Student Learning Center. Please make sure you find help that's offered by the college.